Hello everyone. Welcome to the fourth part of Asia and Pacific episodes. We are going to talk about one of the most controversial areas in the Asia and Pacific region. Our topic is Senkaku and Taiwan, Japan's current military posture, and its future. Here we are going to discuss with my guest about China-Japan-Taiwan relation in context of the dispute over the Senkaku Islands, US-China competition in the region, and the position of Japan as well as defense of Japan. My guest Yoshihiro Inaba. Yoshihiro is a freelance writer living in Japan. He's one of the few young military writers in Japan and is currently a student studying international law, especially self-defense and use of force at a Japanese graduate school. He is particularly familiar with the Japan's ground, maritime, and air self-defense forces. He currently writes for multiple Japanese military magazines as well as for Naval News, a French-based web media outlet. Welcome to Yoshihiro. Let to begin into the program with a question about this most controversial area, Senkaku Islands, very strategic location between Japan, China, and Taiwan. Yoshihiro, can you tell us about the background of Senkaku Island disputes?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to such a great event. I'm a little nervous, but I'm very exciting for such great events. And I would like to answer about your first questions and about the Senkaku Island dispute and the historical background of it. And first of all, I'd like to mention about the Japanese official position about the Senkakus. Japanese government, over and over assert that there is no territorial dispute among the Japan and China, or Japan and Taiwan, because the Senkaku Island is historically and legally the Japanese territory. So there is no the confrontations or no dispute between those nations. And I'd like to answer your questions. Until at least the 1970s, the non-country had objected to the sovereignty over the Senkaku of the Japanese government. The 1895, the Japanese government decided to integrate the Senkaku Islands into their own territories. And after that, the 1970s, there's no country had objected to that situations, including China. But the end of the 1960s, the UN reported that there is some possibility that the nearby the Senkaku or East China Seas has numerous natural resources, including oil or gas. So after that, the end of the 1970s, China and Taiwan asserts that the Senkaku Island is own territory, not the Japanese. So the confrontation had started since the 1970s. This is a very simple background of the Senkaku Island situations.
When we go into the East China Sea, what is the geopolitical importance for Japan?
That question is very difficult to answer for me, because the geopolitics is not only the military aspect, but also the politics, the economics, and the geography. And so this is a bit difficult for me to answer this question, because I am not familiar with all of these elements. But however, from a military perspectives, the importance of East China Sea and the Senkaku Island, particularly the Senkaku Island, is not high. This is because the islands that make up the Senkaku Islands are so small and inside that there is no place to hide the deployed weapons, such like radars or missile systems. Maybe the Japan or China can put the simply put the weapon system out there, and they can operate those missile or radar system. But if some kind of a contingency will be happens, the opponent can easily strike those targets because there is no height to praise. And so the Senkaku Island is not good for the contingency situation. But in the peacetime situations, it can have a role as some kind of watchtower or showing their presence with the multiple weapon systems, like China is doing in the South China Sea, the artificial islands. Those artificial islands is very weak for the enemy strike. So this is not good for the contingency situations. And I think the U.S. can strike those artificial islands very easily with the long-range cruise missiles. But the peacetime situations, as you know, as you can see, the China is using those artificial islands as a tool for control the South China Sea very effectively. So it can be said the same things at the Senkaku Island in East China Seas. And furthermore, with regard to our Senkaku Islands, in addition to the issue of the military and or undersea resources, I think patriotism, some kind of patriotism regarding the territory is also an important factor. Also, I believe that the territorial issue always related to the element of patriotism of the people. Therefore, I believe that this creates a line with each party that cannot be withdrawn. So that is my point.
In Yoshihiro, in a case of Chinese invasion or control over the Senkaku Islands, what kind of agreement are existed between United States and Japan?
I understand that there is no special agreement between United States and Japan regarding the defending of Senkaku Islands. But as you know, Japan has a alliance treaty with the United States, and the Article 5 of that treaty clearly mentioned that if some nation make attack against Japan, which means the armed attack against Japan, then the United States triggering the right of collective self-defense, and Japan is clearly exercising their inherent right of self-defense. The United States have an obligation to defend Japanese territory from the invaders. So, since the Obama administrations, the United States government has clearly mentioned that this Article 5 has obligation to defend the Japanese territory, including the Senkaku Islands. So there is no specialized agreement with the United States and Japan, but we can use the Article 5 of the Japan-U.S. alliance treaties for use such situations.
Yoshihiro, given the geographical proximity of Taiwan to the Senkaku Islands, what kind of disputes exist between Japan and Taiwan over the Senkaku? Because as we know, in Taiwan side, the Senkaku Island also calling us Diaotoyu Islands. What kind of disputes are existing between Taiwan and Japan, and what is the latest situation of these disputes?
As you mentioned, that the Taiwan has asserted that the Senkaku Island is its own territory since the 1970s because of there is a much there's a the possibility, the numerous the natural resources that there. And so the assertion is the same as the Chinese assertions, and historically and legally assertion is overall same as the China's. But I have to mention about the Taiwan is that the Taiwan's Coast Guard is sometimes more aggressive than the Chinese Coast Guard's behaviors. For example, the 2012, the Taiwan fishing boat incursion into the Japanese territorial waters and chasing them Taiwan Coast Guard chasing them and incursion into the Japanese territorial waters. And Japanese Coast Guard vessels starting to firing the water guns against the fishery boats. And then the Taiwan's Coast Guard vessel also return fire with the water guns against the Japanese Coast Guard vessels. Even though the Chinese Coast Guard vessels intruding time and time into the Japanese territorial waters and contiguous zones, they didn't use the water guns against the JCZ vessels. So I think this conduct of the Taiwan Coast Guard is much more aggressive than the Chinese Coast Guard. But from the other perspective, the Chinese Coast Guards continuously are the presence at the Senkaku Islands, and the Taiwan Coast Guard didn't doing so. So from that perspective, the Chinese Coast Guard is much more strong presence at the Senkaku Islands compared with the Taiwan Coast Guard vessels.
Given the geopolitical importance and its location between the stakeholder countries and claimants, what is the importance of Senkaku Islands in international maritime law?
Under the international law, the coastal state can have the internal waters and the territorial seas, contiguous zone, and the exclusive economic zone, so-called EEZ, from the baseline of the islands in the Senkaku Islands, and particularly about the EEZ, exclusive economic zone, is very important for the each countries, and particularly the Senkaku Islands have numerous natural resources at the bottom. So the importance based on the international law is they can maintain the EEZs, and they can maintain the developing of the natural resources, living or non-living, both of them. This is, I think, very important things.
When given the security relation between Taiwan and Japan, what does Taiwan being intervention and controlled by China means for Japan?
I think there is some problem regarding the Japanese security, but most important thing is if China has invaded into the Taiwan, that they strike the numerous Japan-based United States bases, including Okinawa, Sasebo, Yokosuka, and Misawa. And particularly the Okinawa will be under the heavy attack with the ballistic missile and cruise missiles, because some kind of the situation will be happen at the Taiwan. The United States will send the forces to intervene and stop the Chinese invasion against Taiwan, but there is no much numbers of FOB or bases out there. So Japanese base is very crucial for the operation of the United States forces. And China is understanding that situations. So China will strike first the Okinawa and the Kyushu and the Honshu bases. And also the some kind of Japanese self-defense forces bases will be attacked by the Chinese forces. So I think that those point is very crucial for the Japanese security. So
in this context, is there any security relation between Japan and Taiwan? For example, when the China intervention to the Taiwan, is there any agreement between Japan and Taiwan? Or?
I think there's no agreement between Japan and Taiwan, but there's some possibility that the Japan will intervene that situation under the defense under the some defense registry. So I think the JSDF conduct the supply mission against the United States forces and the protection of the United States vessels from the enemy attacks. And also, if some attacks has occurred against the Japanese territory, then Japan can use full force, full strength against the China's.
Among this conflict, what is the importance of the Japan and Taiwan relation in the U.S. alliance system in the region?
Yes. Currently, there's no official military cooperation between Japan and Taiwan, as I said. And however, if we consider that contingency occurring in the East China Sea can be equated with contingency in Taiwan, the cooperative relationship between Japan and Taiwan is very important to the Japan-U.S. alliance. If Japan's JSDF, Japan Self-Defense Forces, and Taiwan's military can work together smoothly through our information sharing and coordination of actions in the contingencies, the Japan-U.S. alliance will be able to function more smoothly during that contingencies. So this is important for the Japan-U.S. alliance.
In our main topic, what are the Japan's current military posture and its future in context of Senkaku Island and possible military crisis in the Taiwan Straits?
We have to focus on about the Senkaku Island. We have to distinguish the two scenarios. One of it is the military invasion against the Senkaku, the direct military invasion. So then, in this context, China will use all available forces and take control of the Senkaku with military forces powers. Then it will be a constituent armed attack against Japan. So Japan can use full strength forces based on the individual self-defense, because it is a constituent armed attack against Japan. Also, the United States can smoothly intervene into that situation because they have an obligation under the U.S.-Japan Alliance Article 5. Then Japan have useful forces for that situations. For example, the JGSDF, Japan Ground Self-Defense Forces, have Amphibious Rapid Deployment Brigade, or ALDBs. It looks like the United States Marine Corps forces, and they are specialized for retake the remote island and defending those islands. And also the JGSDF have some kind of A2AD capabilities, like Type 12 SSM, which can hit the enemy vessels from a distance, like 200 kilometers away. And also the JGSDF have SAM or SAM, Type 03 SAM, and it can shooting down the multiple targets, including aircraft and the cruise missiles. And also JMSDF have the very massive submarine forces and the anti-submarine warfare capability. And also they have the Aegis destroyer, or DDGs, and those forces can strike back against the Chinese invasion against the Senkaku. That is a very simple the scenarios. But most Japanese experts, including the Japanese government, have considered the other scenarios. We so-call that the gray zone conflict, or gray zone situations, or hybrid warfare situations. Under these scenarios, China will use the all available force other than military force, like law enforcement agencies or civilian fisheries, civilian fishermen, and the maritime militia. For example, the numerous numbers of Chinese fishing boats intruding into the Senkaku Islands, and they overthrow the capability of a Japanese Coast Guard. And some of the vessels intended to intruding into the Japanese territorial waters and landing. After that, the Chinese Coast Guard vessel chasing them and landing the Senkaku Islands as well. And they take some kind of a law enforcement action against those fishermen. And they can claim that this is a very lawful actions, because Senkaku is the Chinese territory, not the Japanese territory. So this action is clearly legal under international law regimes because they have jurisdiction under the international law. So these scenarios is hard to I can say compensate or hard to tackle with Japanese armed forces, because there is no armed attack against Japanese territory. It's just confrontation between the law enforcement agencies and civilians. So Japan cannot use the JSDF or the United States alliance with the United States. So they have to tackle with this situation with law enforcement actions like JCG or police units. That is a very important to consider that situation. And I would like to mention about the Taiwan issues. Recently Taiwan is a very the urging threat for the Japanese security, because the recent year Chinese naval power and air power is growing up compared with last decades, and they are launching aircraft carriers and the amphibious assault vessels, and also they built the domestic built guided missile destroyers. And those forces have an intent to intervene or aggression against Taiwan. So we have to consider that some kind of contingency will be happen up there, and for that situation, Japan has numerous. Japan have to have numerous capabilities, like as I mentioned, JMSDF already have multiple submarines and the maritime patrol aircraft, and also they modify the JS Izumo and JS Kaga to the some kind of a light aircraft carriers to operate the F-35Bs. So mix of these capabilities. For example, the Chinese naval vessels, which have an intent to sending the reinforcement for the invasion units, maybe the JMSDF forces can strike those vessels with the submarine, or to operate some kind of a maritime patrol aircraft. The JS Izumo or JS Kaga can operate as light aircraft carriers, and they send the F-35Bs, and they take control over the limited airspaces, and then the U.S. forces can operate at there, or JMSDF or JSDF fighter jet or JMSDF maritime patrol aircraft can operate there and hunting the Chinese submarines or naval vessels. That is my point.
Related to this conflict situation, again, I would like to mention the G7 summit. At the G7 summit, Japan seemed uncertain about the discussion on China by other members of the club. How should we evaluate this situation within the scope of U.S.-Japan relation?
I'm not specialized for the foreign affairs or the diplomatic the issues, but I think that that is important that the last the Japan US 2+2 and Japan Australia 2+2, they mentioned very clearly that the Taiwan issue is very crucial for the security of each country, and also the last Prime Minister Suga and President Biden's meeting and the joint statement of the two tops have clearly mentioned that the Taiwan issues. So yes, exactly that in the G7 summit, the Japanese and the status is very uncertain. But on the other hand, those are diplomatic the relationship with United States and Australia mentioned about the Taiwan issue, and also from the military perspective, the recently the JSDF has a very aggressive operations or very aggressive exercises conducting nearby Japan and also including South China Seas. As you know, since the 2017, the JMSDF has sent the JS Ismo and JS Kaga and the other multiple vessels into the South China Seas, and to assess that the importance of rule-based orders and international law, and they conduct the multiple exercises with multinational countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore, India, New Zealand, and Australia. Each of these activities very important for the Japanese security, and also it is a very good showcasing that they sent a message against China that the Japan is understand that the importance of the peace and the rule-based orders out there. And also, recently the JGSDF and JMSDF has conducted the multilateral exercises with United States, France, and Australia. It is separate from the two parts, and the maritime part and ground part. In the maritime part, the JMSDF and U.S. Navy, French Navy, and the Australian Navy has conducted the multilateral exercises, and the ground part. This is a very important thing because this ground part exercises, the purpose is retake the remote island from the invaders, and the JGSDF helicopter CH-47 Chinook had sent the troops from the Japan, United States, and France, and they attack the airport, which are taken by the enemy forces, and they cooperate and retake this airport, and they secure the remote island from the invaders. They didn't mention very clearly that which remote islands they sink into the mind, but it is clear that the remote island is, I think, it's Senkaku or the nearby the Okinawa Islands. So this is very clearly the message against the China's. When you are invaded our territories, we fighting back, and we retake those islands with the multilateral arrangements. This is my point.
I'm going to ask last question about the problem over Senkaku Islands. Currently, what problems are experienced between GMSDF and Chinese patrols around the Senkaku Islands? What kind of measures is the GMSDF taking to stop the Chinese incursion?
First of all, how can I say, the direct incursion against the Senkakus and is conducted by the Chinese Coast Guard vessels, and they are countered by the Japanese Coast Guard vessels, and inside the Senkaku's territorial waters, and if when the Chinese Coast Guard vessels incursion into the Japanese territorial waters, it is not the innocent passage. So it is so they conduct the non-innocent passage. So Japanese Coast Guard send warning message against them and leaving territorial waters immediately, and they escort them to monitor the activities. But and also the JMSDF vessels is operating nearby the Senkaku, but it's much more remote locations, and they are monitoring the not the Chinese Coast Guard, but they monitoring the Chinese Navy's moving at the nearby the Senkakus. So, and I want to mention about the Chinese Coast Guard and Japanese Coast Guard the issues. They have the clear intent that the Senkaku is not belonging to the Japan, but it's Chinese territory. So they operate normally. And this is a Chinese side the assertion, and Japanese Coast Guard is acting to defend the Senkaku Islands from those assertions. But the Chinese Coast Guard vessel is the government vessels, so they have sovereign immunities under the international law. So the Japanese Coast Guard can strike or some kind of coercive action against them, even though they cannot use the law enforcement action against them. It is only the warning against the Chinese vessels and leaving territorial waters immediately. But some Japanese politicians say that when the Chinese Coast Guard vessels starting the firing against the Japanese Coast Guard vessels, then the JCG vessel can and firing back against the Chinese Coast Guard vessels under the international law. It has a much debate about that issues and very difficult problem around there. But I think I agree with that the opinion. If some kind of firearms will be launched from the Chinese Coast Guard vessel against the Japanese Coast Guard vessels, Japanese Coast Guard can shooting back as self-defense. So or even the Chinese Coast Guard using the how can I say the coercive actions other than the use of armed force, then the Japanese Coast Guard can take countermeasure against them. Also, they cannot use the armed forces, but the stopping the vessels movement with the stop their movement, or even the using water gun against them, or to warning shots. I think this is countermeasure against those situations.
Now, I would like to jump into from the most controversial geopolitical areas to the Japan defense. Yoshihiro, what is the current status of the Aegis airshow replacement program in Japan?
That is a very important but very difficult questions. First of all, the Japanese government decided to introduce the 2 Aegis ashore sites in the 2017 because of the ballistic missile threat from the North Korea. That time, the North Korea have launched the multiple ballistic missile against the Sea of Japan or Pacific Oceans, and the most Japanese people feeling the fear against those situations. So Japanese government decided to introduce the Aegis ashore. But the 2020s, Japanese government decided to cancel of the install of the Aegis ashore. because of the multiple program has arise among them. And but North Korea is still have multiple ballistic missiles, and also they have the nuclear warhead capabilities. So Japanese government decided to introduce the other options to replace the Aegis Ashore program. And then the end of the 2020, the Japanese government decided to introduce 2 Aegis system equipped ships to as an alternative plan for the Aegis Ashore deployment. But the specific specific the equipment or what it looks like is not the decided yet. But I think that it has a very limited capabilities to intercept the ballistic missile, because as I mentioned, the Aegis Ashore of the the introduce of Aegis Ashore has an aim to intercept the ballistic missile from the North Korea, and not and other threats like cruising missiles or other anti-ship missiles against Japan. So it's naturally that the Aegis system equipped also has the same characteristic with the Aegis Ashore. So they have very limited capabilities to intercept the ballistic missile. For example, they have the SM-3 interceptors, but they don't have SM-2 interceptor, which specialize for the intercept the aircraft or other missiles. And also, they don't have to conduct the anti-submarine warfare, because the Aegis Ashore doesn't have such capabilities. And also the gun system, like 45-inch guns, it can strike the ground targets or maritime targets. I think the Aegis system equipped ships don't have such a gun system. So some people say that the Aegis system equipped ships looks like Aegis destroyers, like U.S. Ticonderoga class or Areva class, and JMSDF existing have such ships. But I don't think that that is the truth. I don't think that is truth. As I mentioned, I think that the Aegis system equipped ship has a very limited capabilities compared with the existing Aegis destroyers. So it is completely different. So, and we have to make distinction between the Aegis system equipped ships and the Aegis system equipped destroyers. It is a completely different ones. So that is my point.
Okay, related to this question, will Japan have a strict capability in the future? What kind of strict capability and currently Japan have and in the future compared to the future and now?
As you know, the Japan has a very limited military capabilities because of their constitutions, Article 9. But the security situation has been changed since the Japan adopted the constitution in the 1946, and North Korea has a ballistic missile with the nuclear warhead, and China is also increasing their military capabilities and compared with the decades ago. And also, they have multiple long-range missiles, not only the ballistic missile, but also the hypersonic ground vehicles and the long-range cruise missiles. And recently, they have stealth fighter jet and the UAVs to strike the very distant object. So, under these situations, Japanese government have decided to introduce the long-range weapons to defend the remote islands from the same safe distance, like Jasuzumiya or JSM or NSM, and or something like those are missile capabilities. each missile have a very long range capabilities. For example, the Jasusumi has 900 kilometers ranges, so it can strike the targets from the same distance, safe distance, compared with the existing weapon systems. But the other options the Japanese government considered is that the domestically built weapons extended the range of their domestically built weapon systems. For example, the Type 12 SSM, as I mentioned, have originally the 200 kilometers ranges, but some news reports say that the Japanese government have considering to extend those range to the 900 kilometers, and the goal is 1,500 kilometers or 1,200 kilometers. That is a very enough range to strike the very strategic locations located at the China or North Korea from the Japanese homeland. And also, Japanese ground self-defense forces will have have a hypersonic glide vehicles, and it has a very long range, and I think it can be hit the targets located at the North Korea or China, and also it can hit the invading forces for the Senkaku or Taiwan. That is a very crucial weapon system for the Japanese security. But last, I would like to mention about the very important point. If the Japan had such a capability, which means the very long-range weapon systems, it doesn't mean that the Japan want to independent from the Japan-U.S. alliance. Now you can see the Japan has very heavily depend on the U.S. Military forces, particularly the long-range strike capability, because the Japan has no such capabilities today. And some politicians say, or some experts say, that if Japan have such a capabilities, it means the independence from the Japanese, independent from the U.S. military alliance. But it is totally wrong, because the
yes, okay. You can.
So because if such weapons Japan will have, Japan doesn't have capability to detect and track the enemy targets from the long distances. It will be need for the satellite monitoring and using UAVs or other very state-of-the-art sensors. And the U.S. military forces already have such capability. So I think the Japanese such military developing will mean that the much more will make the more deep collaboration with the United States, and they can strike the enemy forces with United States forces, and they make deep cooperations compared with last decades. And I think that is my point.
Yoshihiro, in a war case in East China Sea or South China Sea, how will Japan to respond any kind of attacks on the Senkaku and Taiwan? Japan has distinguished policies for Taiwan or Senkaku, or they have one policy to respond to China?
That is very important, but that is very difficult questions. As you know, the Japan has a very restrictive the force posture or the defense organizations, and also their policy is very restrictive as well. So Japan can respond with armed force is only the two cases. One is direct attack against the Japanese territory, which means it's the armed attack, or the the Japanese something like a Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Forces vessels or JSDF aircraft will be attacked, then Japan can be use of force against them. And also, and the like United States, the very important nation for Japanese security will attack. Then Japan can be use of force as a measure under the corrective self-defense. So the one thing, as I have to mention is that Taiwan is crucial for the Japanese securities. So which means if Taiwan have strike have invaded, really Japan can strike back with the corrective self-defense. I think as I mentioned that there is no official agreement with Taiwan and Japan to military assistance, but the Taiwan is very crucial for the Japanese security because they have very capable radars, and which based on the U.S.-made early warning radars called the Page, and it can detect the ballistic missile, cruise missile, and also they can track some kind of stealth fighter jets. And this tracking data is very crucial for the Taiwan security. It is very natural, but also. Yes.
Yes, your voice is very slow. Can you check it, please?
Can you hear me?
Just leave it. I can.
Can you hear me?
It's still doesn't fix.
So once I read.
Can you check them? Sorry.
Can you hear me, my boss? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Now, can you speak, please, Yoshihiro?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Very
yes.
sorry for description.
Yes, it's great. Yes, the very important point is that the tracking data of that Taiwan's radars is shared with the United States forces through the C2BMC, which located at the Hawaii, and also that the C2BMCs can share the information with the Japanese side. So I think logically that Taiwan's radars information is shared with Japan, I think. So that radars can cover the very wide ranges, including the South China Seas and East China Seas. So some kind of military action again at South China Sea or East China Sea will be happens, then the Japan can detect that movement throughout the Taiwan radar tracking data from the Taiwan. So I think the Taiwan security is very important for the Japanese security, and I think it's depend on the situation, but if some kind of contingency will happen at nearby Taiwan, Japan can exercise their corrective self-defense and defend the Taiwan from the invasion. But it's a very restrictive situations and very restrictive capabilities which Japan have. But that thing is very important for the Taiwan security.
Sorry, Yoshihiro, again I lost your voice.
Well, sorry, can you hear me?
Okay, I think we can go to the end of the program. Can you hear me, Yoshihiro?
I can hear you, Lokman.
Now I'm going to the end. Thank you very much, Yoshihiro. Thank you very much for the information.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me in such events. I'm sorry, but the malfunction of my devices maybe.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for watching us.
I'm sorry.
Please like it and following us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have more programs on ASEAN Pacific. Today we discussed the geopolitical and security relations in ASEAN around Senkaku Islands. See you in next program. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Yoshihiro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lokman.